Hello and welcome to another episode of Market Motivators. I'm Kelly Kleinman. Today's guest is a graduate of SUNY, so no real football fight song to play for his intro. I apologize for that. We like doing that. But he did take a Dale Carnegie course. So for that, I salute you, Mr. Ken Hill. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That accurate portrayal of my background.
Well, let's get right to the meat of the matter. There are data security issues galore in the retail auto industry. I'd like to take them one by one. Spooky risk numero uno is on the dealership side, whereby the government can hold a dealership responsible for any consumer data that gets stolen. If it's a total data breach, they can be fined a ton of money for each individual customer that loses their data, and they could go back 10 years on it. Please explain how costly that can be to a dealership if the state decides to go hardball, and in the worst case, could that put dealerships out of business?
$46,000 per instance. So it doesn't take much math to figure out how much it would take to, put a dealership out of business. That's a pretty big, hefty fine. And so I think they're really right now with the current landscape of the government, they are very consumer protective, and I think the concept is correct, right? We need to protect consumer data inside of dealerships, and there needs to be some standard policies and some standard base configurations in place to ensure that the consumer information is being safeguarded. And so I think the concept is correct. I'm not sure I agree with the penalties or the enforceability. They want dealers to have these things in place by the end of the year. But yeah, it's very impactful, and it's not an easy lift to get where the government wants you to be either. So it's pretty significant.
How common is it for a dealership to actually employ a compliance officer to oversee data, or do they generally go after third parties or bring in subcontractors to evaluate and ameliorate the risk as an outsource?
Well, I think from a technology standpoint, there's probably a dealership level of sophistication based on size, car sales, where they start to outsource technology. And then even bring in, and have a technology staff that maybe oversees and have third-party assessments to ensure that everything's secure and they have good procedures in place. But from a compliance officer's standpoint, the government mandated that dealerships have a compliance officer defined when they put the red flags law in 7 to 10 years ago, when they put the red flags, and they dictated their expectations of a dealership, and they said that dealership is, basically a lender. They consider dealerships lenders because of their
financial institution.
Yeah, a Ranger credit model. So when they came out with the red flags law, they said you need to have a policy on site, and you need to have a defined compliance officer, and he needs to sign this document. And they outlaid a bunch of expectations of things that they wanted dealers to have in place for that red flags regulation. So it should be common. If dealers don't have one, they need to get one quickly, and because it's also part of the new safeguards regulation that's going into the year. You need to have and they classify it as I believe it's called a well-qualified individual. Let's say, you can't hire an intern and make him your compliance officer. You need to have someone that knows how to manage this process and manage your compliance functions and your safeguards within your dealership. So.
It seems like it would be an outsourced position. It just doesn't seem like it would be a full-time job.
It is. Again, depending on the size of the dealership, but because you have to have compliance, isn't just do it once and get it in.
Right.
And the majority of the heavy lifting is getting these processes in place inside a dealership, putting in place processes to audit that they are in fact in place, and then monitoring, and you have to do board reporting on a regular basis, of which is the results of your audits that you're doing internally. So I mean, I've always thought that, you know, with the agent models, and there's some agents that do this, they help dealers manage these processes for them. But if you have several dealerships right now, I'm overseeing compliance programs in each of the dealerships, auditing them in each of the dealerships. So that gets to be a full-time job pretty quickly.
So you're doing that.
No, we don't. We don't do it now.
Darn, I was trying to prop you up there.
We have recently partnered, and we've press releases and stuff with ComplyNet, and they do have services where they'll come into a dealership and help them do that. Actually, you know, help them with their audits, and we have programs that actually we sell and partner with ComplyNet on putting some of those audits and stuff in place, and helping the dealers with the audits and the reporting. And I think it's more of a, you know, like you said, an upfront consulting, get this stuff in place. This is what you need to be doing. Okay, now you're good. You just need to have somebody designated to be responsible for this.
Ken, what's the risk to the consumer regarding data loss?
Well, let me just expand on that a little bit too. With the new safeguards regulation, it is any consumer information that's coming into your dealership. It's not just on credit, right? It's not just credit applications, credit reports. It's any consumer information that's flowing into your dealership. Service lane, you know, what are you doing at the front desk? Are you writing down an appointment on a piece of paper? Are you entering it into a CRM, right? I think there's probably people that still use paper, right? If a dealership has a breach, right, there's a reason that they're coming after that data, right? There's a reason, and typically the reason is to grab that information and then be able to steal people's identities, right? If I can have access to someone's name and address, and I can get their credit file, right? I have access to their account information. I have access to their date of birth, their social security number, maybe, right? I can start to open lines of credit, right? Steal their identity, open lines of credit. I think pretty much most people should be familiar with identity theft and how to keep an eye out, watch for it, monitor for it. So that's the risk to the consumer, is having their identity stolen.
Well, what's the risk to the vendor? Are the dealers actually responsible for their vendors who
Yes.
might have access to the dealer's database, or
Yes.
can a state prosecutor basically have both of them in his crosshairs?
He could have both, right? Like for instance, the safeguard regulations that are going into place at the end of the year, there's a vendor survey requirement. You have to do an internal survey, determine what systems do I have consumer information into, what vendors do I have consumer information that resides in. Yeah. And then I have to ensure those vendors meet certain standards in terms of, multi-factor authentication, encrypting data at rest, logins expire, things like that. So I have to build a list of things that I expect my vendors to be in compliance with. And then I have to ensure that vendor is. I sign a bunch of vendor certifications from dealers every day, right? They want us to certify that we have these safeguard regulations in place. And because we deal with credit data, we've had to do it since the beginning of time. But now dealers are expected to survey their vendors. And in the regulation, it even suggests if you survey a vendor and he can't, answer that, yes, he's got all these things in place, you need to find another vendor. Vendors, education needs not only to be with the dealerships, vendors need to be educated on what their expectations are. And it's not the big guys, right? The major DMSs, the major CRMs, they have, I would say, most of these things in place. If not, they're probably, identifying gaps and filling them. It's the little guys, the new guys, mid-sized companies, right? Because you have to have some major infrastructure behind your system to support what these requirements demand. So,
as we discuss the fraud and the culpability of potentially a vendor, what does that have to do with synthetic identity fraud? It seems like it could take three groups out at once, like a bowling ball, kind of like your lender, your dealer, and an unaware consumer.
Yeah. Well, that would be identity theft, right? And you mentioned synthetic fraud. That's identity theft where I get somebody's name right, and that's where you take it. Synthetic fraud is different. It's actually a built identity with a couple of pieces of stolen information that don't go back on the original consumer. If the fraudsters bill a synthetic identity, and I don't know if most people are aware, but if I put a name and address and a social security number in, and I say, okay, give me this person's credit report. If that information doesn't align with what's at the credit bureau, they create a file at the credit bureau. So that's how they go about building that synthetic identity, is they create that file at the credit bureau. And so that's different from what we're talking about here, but it's still a major thing that dealers need to be aware of. If they don't have synthetic fraud protection inside their dealership now, we recommend it. I would say about 70% of our new dealers that we sign up have put some type of synthetic fraud identification in place.
It's kind of a build-a-bot, it's
Yes.
creating a different reality, or completely different, a person that doesn't really even exist.
Oh, and they're patient. They'll wait 18 months to 2 years before they do what they call the breakout. I think that's what's called, breakout, cash out. But when they just build up their credit, build it up, then they go in and buy major purchases at the end of that breakout, bust out. I think it's called bust out at the end of that 8 months, 2 years. And that's the danger to dealerships, because when they're ready to walk away, they've built up this synthetic identity and they've created credit lines. They'll start buying things, and in a week time frame, they'll buy things, and then they go after the major purchases. They go after dealership purchases. We have a synthetic fraud protection product, and it's caught fraudsters trying to buy cars. And a couple of times when the fraudster's trying to buy a car, he's got 3 other ones that he just bought with that same identity down the road in a parking lot. And they'll grab him and they'll find the other vehicles that he just recently purchased with that synthetic identity. So that's the danger to dealers, is because they're getting taken right at the time of the exit plan, and the guy disappears with all the stolen merchandise. And the dealer, depending on the dealer, is often responsible for that car, right? The lenders, oh, you didn't, yeah, no, you got to pay for that. That's your loss, not ours, not the lenders.
Well, look, it's risky business these days. The bad guys are always one step ahead, right?
Yes, always. I always compare it to I don't even know if they make them anymore, but radar detectors, right? They'd come out with a radar detector, and the police would come out with a new ban or something that the old radar detector didn't pick up. So the new radar detector, back and forth. By the time you bought a radar detector, it was out of date 3 months later, because the fraudsters, the police had increased their technology to come out with a way to bypass those radar detectors. So.
Yeah. You're giving away your age. That's a 70s guy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Define a soft pull. What are the elements involved in a soft pull to assess a customer's worthiness? Some of these questions might seem a little bit naive. I mean, we all kind of know what they are if we're in the industry, but there's some newbies who listen to this, and certainly some consumers as well. So what the heck is a soft pull? Does it affect my credit?
Okay. So the basic example that I use is that pre-approved credit card you got in the mail, right? You get that pre-approved credit card from that financial institution, and they have done a soft pull on you, and they have seen that you've met their minimum criteria, right? You have to meet the lenders or dealers minimum criteria, and they'll place a soft inquiry on your credit file. Doesn't impact your score. Only the consumer can see them. They don't even set off the monitoring tools because there's no impact to the consumer. But if you were to pull your credit report at Credit Karma, you'd see that pre-approved credit card offer you just got in the mail. So that's an example of a soft pull. That's what we call a pre-screen. The other example would be Eugene Levy's get pre-qualified Cap One commercials, right? That's the one that they're being incorporated in digital retailing tools now, that are also being utilized in engagement tools to get consumers pre-qualified, where consumers consenting to have their credit accessed, but it's a soft pull. And what it allows and the benefits to the consumer are they're going to get more accurate payment quotes at the top of the sales funnel. Same thing with a pre-screen. You're going to get an accurate payment quote at the top of the sales funnel, so that you can get rid of that customer frustration of getting to the finance office, having your credit pulled, and the deal that you were talking about in the front of the store is nothing compared to what the deal in the finance office is telling you. Yeah. So it gets rid of that consumer confusion, makes consumers aware of the offers that are available to them, like that credit card. Maybe you need another credit card you weren't aware, or the lower interest credit card, right? So the benefit is you qualify for this lower interest credit card or this line of credit. I would say that's the definition of what a soft pull is. And I mentioned they're being utilized now in digital retail products because it's important to have an accurate payment quote when you're walking through a digital retail workflow.
Right.
Especially now that a lot of these digital retail solutions are being pushed into the front of the store as well as online. And you want to have that same workflow in the front of the store as you have it in line, so that you have that accurate payment and you're getting that customer in the right deal. It makes the deal go smoother. It's better customer experience because there's not that payment shock in the finance office when I got a soft pull at the beginning. So that's why they're so popular right now, and it's what's keeping us the busiest. Are these soft pull implementations for dealers, it's keeping us hopping.
Yeah, I can understand that. I remember back in the day, you mentioned lower credit rates, but back in the day, the lower credit rates now were illegal. Yeah. Back in the 80s and 70s, where 15% was an absolute cap. Anything more than that was loan sharking. Now it's 24, 25, 28%. It should be criminal, my opinion.
Yeah.
Not an editorial show. So back to the fraud thing. Is the responsibility on the dealership/vendor alone, or should the lender also be culpable in the process, although they too are victimized? What stops my attorney from bludgeoning a lender as well as a dealership? Or a prosecutor?
Yeah, well, if the lenders, I've seen some lenders, in making it mandatory that dealers have certain levels of identity tools and fraud tools in the dealership.
Still not clear cut though, right?
Right. Yeah, and it's when that the transaction between the dealership and the lender, right? Did it happen before or after? But I've also heard lenders coming back at the dealerships and saying, I don't care if it happened. You sold that vehicle, you're responsible. So now, and if you're a consumer and you've had your identity stolen and somebody's used it to purchase a car, right? That was one of the purposes of the red flag regulation, which has done a pretty good job of minimizing identity theft at a dealership. It is, the lender expects the dealer to have that type of protection in place to verify the consumer. A lot of states now are starting to come out with, like for instance, I think it's Michigan, right? If you're a dealership in Michigan, you have to check. I think they have a deadbeat dad type file. Like if you have. And if you finance a vehicle in Michigan and that person was on the deadbeat dad file list, you have to pay for that deadbeat dad's back support child payments.
Oh my God, that's
Yeah.
insane.
Yeah, that's a reach, right? But it's a way to protect that, that mom or dad in the deadbeat, from that person that's buying a new car, but yet hasn't made his child support payments, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So if I'm an attorney, you're basically telling me I could go after whoever I want.
Yeah, I see. Unfortunately, I see it's mostly dealerships, so it's not the lenders. Right? There's even we were involved in a case several years ago. Right, there's attorneys who are paying people to go into dealerships that have a 500 score, a 400 score, and if that and try to purchase a car from the dealership. Obviously, it's not going to happen, but they want to make sure that that dealership is giving that consumer, their person, a risk-based pricing notice or adverse action letter, and making sure that the whole process goes smoothly, even though they were turned down. The minute that doesn't happen, bam, class action lawsuit, and they're calling all the consumers that were turned down for a vehicle in that dealership. I think it's last 5 years, 2 years, but they're calling everybody, and they're asking them to join that class action lawsuit, and they're settling for millions of dollars. So it's
tragic.
Yeah, so it's borderline entrapment, right?
Totally, it is. It's more than borderline. It's predatory entrapment.
Yeah.
Which entrapment is predatory by nature anyway, right?
Yeah.
So what additional verification technology is available? How painful is it to use, especially when you're trying to close a deal as fast as possible? And then let's talk about your company. What do you provide? And we don't like to do advertorials here, but let's give it a shot.
No, I just wrote an article about this. What's amazing today is that the majority of dealerships already have driver's license scanners in place to scan that license. And so they have an image because they're required to obtain an image of the license. And, but the main reason they're doing it is to OCR the data and auto-populate it into the CRM, right? So they have the majority, and we recently was discussing this with one of the major CRMs who provides driver's license scanners to their dealers. 95, and they have the ability to put authentication on top of that scan while they're OCRing the data to help validate the document and validate that person. 95% of the dealers opt out for that. They only want to get that image and OCR the data. So dealers really need to look at their processes and adding. We just came out with a physical scanner and a mobile scanner you can scan from your phone. It does the same thing. It grabs the data, OCRs the data, pushes it in CRM. But our focus is on validating that document. And there's most driver license scanning companies now are building these tools. So, but it validates the document. And then we also validate the identity that's behind the document, check it for red flag, check it for identity theft, check it for synthetic fraud. So we're pushing that process, that validation of that consumer before it even goes for a test drive to the top of that funnel, so that it'll eliminate people running off of cars. It eliminates the synthetic fraud early on in the process, rather than not at all or late in the process.
Look, sounds like it reduces your risk well into the 90 percentile.
Yeah, we did. We did a webinar with 3 credit bureaus on synthetic fraud about a year and a half ago. Anybody wants to listen to it, be educated on it, they can go to our website and download it for free, listen to it, but and watch it. But and all 3 bureaus were like the best line of defense to fight against synthetic fraud and identity theft is to validate that driver's license at the beginning, right? And that's the best way to fight that. And I mean, we set up dealers all the time with our driver's license scanner, and one group we had about a 40 store group, and they were like, oh, let's try one, and maybe over the next 6 months, we'll roll it out to the rest of the stores. So we put it in place. Next week, it caught somebody that was trying to use synthetic fraud to steal a car. By the end of the following week, the rest of the 40 stores were installed. So it doesn't add, and to your earlier point, right? It doesn't add to your workflow tremendously, right? Because you're already scanning the driver's license, you're already grabbing the data, pushing it. You're going to get some alerts that you got to work around, but that means it's doing its job. And you have most dealers should have a process in place to handle alerts today for red flags and things of that nature. They should already be in place, just moving them up the funnel. So it should not add a lot to a dealer's workflow.
Well, the risk is too high to a dealership, and inevitably someone's going to be made an example of.
Yes.
The state's coming down on somebody. Yes. And they go back 10 years and they pull out 10,000 customers at 47,000 a pop. Mm-hmm. And then you have to settle, and mm-hmm. you're still out your bunghole.
Yeah.
That's what's going to happen. Or you just have to be able to, wheel the casket through the living room, so to speak, and sell them, on preventing that risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the safeguards, you mentioned 10,000, right? There's a cutoff in the level of your validation of what you have to do to be compliant with the safeguards regulation. And it's 5,000 consumers. And it doesn't take long to get to 5,000 consumers in your databases. But to your point, you need to be advised on how long you need to keep this information, and you also need a disposal policy. Once a month, I'm going and I'm wiping out everything that's older than 7 years, right? Or so you're getting on a rolling basis. After the first one, then you're getting rid of, because again, that's going to minimize your exposure. Minimize consumers' exposure, but you need a good data retention policy. That's not actually spelled out in the safeguards regulation, I don't believe, but it is something you need, is a good data retention policy to support that safeguards policy.
Yeah, I call it a data trashing policy.
Yes. Yeah.
Not that. Well, I was going to ask you one more question. We got 6 minutes left, and this is really just for my own pleasure. Knowledge, I should say, but I find pleasure in attaining vast knowledge on every subject. Why the hell are people paying $750 a month for Altimas these days?
For what?
Why are people paying $750 a month for Altimas? Why are these interest rates so high? And what do they consider a risky borrower?
Yeah, I can't say that one either.
Say that 5 times real quick. So I don't sound so bad. A risky borrower.
Yeah.
Well, although the amount of repos are down quite a bit, you almost wonder, why are these places charging these people so much money to move units, and they're buying them at those rates?
Well, yeah, the dealers are making a spread on a car right now is higher than it's ever been. Yeah, it's unreal. It's a lot. That's inventory, right? And chips shortage and COVID and but inventory is really, dealers aren't selling as many cars, but they're making nice profits on vehicles. Consumers, the pent up demand for vehicles. I'm hoping that we come out of this mess sooner than later, because it's going to be really good for our business. The pent up by the consumer demand right now is incredible, but consumers need cars. Who would, the other thing is how many times you walk in the dealership and you're buying a new car and you're upside down in your car, a lot of it, Now you're looking at, all right, how do I make the most out of my vehicle? I got a lot of, I owe 30,000 on my residual on my lease, but I could turn around and sell it to a dealership or in Carvana for 60 grand. Right.
Yeah.
So it's crazy. But in learning to deal with these times, risky borrowers, buy here, pay here is an interesting strategy. I think there is a large percentage of buy here, pay here's that their strategy is to flip that car.
Yeah. 3 or 4 times.
Yeah. And how do I minimize? Right. How do I get it, do it quickly? And how do I minimize the cost? And how do I turn around quickly? It's not a good time to be a teenager and trying to get a new car without the help of mom or dad. That's for sure.
Or have teenagers. I got to give you credit. You've done what few can do, and you made the credit chat a damn interesting one. Thanks for jumping on board. Where can you be contacted?
Hill at 700credit.com. Anybody has any questions, wants to talk about anything, check out our website, 700credit.com. But I appreciate the opportunity, and I really appreciate you asking us to be on.
My pleasure. Folks, that's all she wrote. I'm Kelly Kleiman, and this has been the Market Motivators podcast. That has been Ken Hill and still is. Have a good day.